had the most dramatic fall from grace in history? Story 1. OJ. His trial was a cultural event, and when he died it was such a non-event that many people don't even know he's dead. It is sorry to everyone that just found out OJ died. Story 2. Pharaoh Akhenaten. Man went from semi-deified ruler to being cancelled so hard and thoroughly that it took until the 20th century to be rediscovered he existed. Story 3. Justinian almost completely reconquered the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. Then his empire was ravaged by a supervolcano-induced nuclear winter that caused famine so bad it resulted in cannibalism. Then the Persian emperor invaded, burned down one of his greatest cities, transported the entire population to Persia and paid them to rebuild the city exactly the same, purely to mock Justinian. He only stopped his invasion after Justinian paid him protection money. This was humiliating, to say the least. This was followed by the worst plague in human history up to that point, named after him. He suffered so badly from it himself that he went into a coma. He left his once prosperous empire almost bankrupt, quite the reversal from being one of the greatest conquerors in history, and he so nearly succeeded. Some extra setbacks Justinian experienced. The Mediterranean was hit by something called an earthquake storm, which sounds pretty unpleasant. He built the grandest cathedral in the world at huge expense, and it repeatedly collapsed, then was burned down in a massive anti-tax riot, then burned down most of the capital. It ended with him luring the mob into the Colosseum to negotiate and killing them all in a giant ambush. There was also a whale, called Porphyrios, that spent 50 years sinking ships traveling to the capital by ramming them. Story 4. Jim Jones. Yeah, Cosby went from adored to monster in a horrible way. Raping and assaulting dozens of women over decades is incredibly cruel and totally counter to his public image. But Jim Jones mass murder-suicided 918 people, a third of whom were children. For those who don't know, Jones was a civil rights icon who played a huge role in integrating Indiana. He had become a serious social activist figure in the San Francisco area and held sway in politics. The reason so many people followed him to Guyana was because he actually did a lot of truly good things in his life. Many people adored him, not just within his organization. The general public didn't think of him as a cult leader or nefarious until he fled the U.S. Story 5. Benedict Arnold was quite literally an American hero, leading key victories at Saratoga. He was a celebrity amongst the American public. Meanwhile, he secretly negotiated to surrender West Point to the British, and now his name is synonymous with traitor. Story 6. OJ. Before the murder, he was beloved, former athlete, NFL sideline guy actor, known as being this outgoing funny nice guy. He was originally in the running to play the Terminator before Arnold, but they passed on him because he was too nice and nobody would believe it. Story 7. Mark Antony was a war hero and seen by the people as Caesar's unofficial heir, and was then the man that avenged his death. Then he went to Egypt, had kids with Cleopatra, who he said would inherit Roman territory, and he was made an enemy of Rome, and the people hated him, saying he was a slave to Cleopatra. In the end he was defeated by a 19-year-old. His army abandoned him and he was tricked into killing himself by Cleopatra, and later his body was dragged through Rome. Story 8. Nikita Khrushchev. One day he's the leader of one of two superpowers in the world. The next day Brezhnev and the KGB ship him off to his dacha for the rest of his life on a pension of 500 rubles a month. Maybe Khrushchev felt himself lucky enough not to be shot, poisoned or defenestrated. Story 9. From the ones that aren't really people known from pop culture, I would say that Aung San Suu Kyi had a pretty dramatic fall from grace. She had won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991, but in the late 2010s she started denying and defending a genocide, although I would argue that this was mostly to placate the military. Still, from one of the persons who were considered a modern Gandhi to covering up genocide, that's a pretty dramatic fall. Story 10. Andrew Cuomo went from being worshipped to being cancelled all within a year. Got elevated so fast it made his brother get more famous too, and then got cancelled so hard he took his brother down with him. Story 11. For Canadians, Buffy Sainte-Marie. Turns out she is neither Indigenous nor Canadian, and has been stripped of all of her honorifics in the past year. Her Order of Canada has been terminated, which is a huge deal as it is the highest Canadian honor. Her Queen Elizabeth Diamond and Golden Jubilee medals revoked. Her Juno Awards and Polaris Music Prizes rescinded. Story 12. Oscar Pistorius. One of the first Paralympic athletes to compete at the Olympic Games, highly respected globally. Then he shot and killed his girlfriend. Story 13. J.K. Rowling is a contender, mostly because it flipped from people burning her books because of satanic panic in the late 90s to people giving her flack for being a transphobe. It's almost a complete 180 when it comes to who celebrates her and who reviles her. Story 14. I'm really shocked not to see Diddy at the top of this thread. 1,000 bottles of baby oil, really, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of how despicable he really is. Story 15. Philippe Pétain went from French hero of World War I to a traitor and Nazi collaborator who handed France over to the Germans in order to be the head of the Vichy regime. He was later sentenced to death, but his sentence was suspended because he was already 84, so they just let him die at home. Story 16. Gaius Julius Caesar. All his bros literally stabbed him in the back. Arguably, they continued to stab him in many more places, but yeah, death by multiple friend stabbing is pretty rough. History seems to make it feel like he didn't even see, or worse, believe the writing on the wall, which, from his perspective, must have been a real shock. Story 17 Henry VIII went from defender of the faith and a favored royal among the papacy to a dissenter, who formed his own church that scraped dry the gold of the Catholic chapels and had several failed marriages ending in executions, divorce or death, along with rumors of madness and STDs, along with a very real rotting wound on his leg which people remarked as reeking horribly. Not to mention he went from being a heavily favored suitor and renowned as handsome to old, fat, and smelly. Story 18 Neil Gaiman. Dude went from a beloved author and scriptwriter to being so poisonous that two successful shows that he was involved with were cancelled, Sandman and Good Omens. The comic book graphic novel community and literary communities have stopped buying things that were once considered must-reads. Films like Coraline, the book series American Gods, and the Sandman graphic novels have all been tainted and removed from most people's must-read watch lists. Story 19 Jimmy Savile. Guy was genuine national hero, he was helping kids and everybody loved him, then he turned out to be a serial abuser of children. He was also reported to be involved in necrophilia, and this went on for years and years, and he was never caught while he was alive. His actions became known only after he had died. Story 20 Adolf Hitler must be a good candidate. He both restored German greatness and utterly ruined the nation. As seen from a German perspective, of course, I can't come up with anyone who was more ruinous to his own people. Story 21 Dramatic fall from grace in all of history, and immediately all the Americans are saying random celebrities like their celeb fall from fame is globally historic. Not Napoleon getting off to an island, not Constantine who nearly rebuilt the Roman Empire but failed, not Sun Yat-sen who died just short of making China a modern nation who could resist the West. Caesar is high up on that list. Entire world history versus American celebrities. FFS Charles the Rash, Duke of Burgundy, takes some beating. He is the richest man in Europe, he is powerful, he then proceeded to alienate every state around him and fight 3 losing battles. Grandson, his expensive army runs away after being surprised by the Swiss, he lost his treasure. Murat, his army is slaughtered by the Swiss. The Milanese ambassador Panigarola reported that Charles laughed and made jokes after his defeat at Murat. He refused to believe he was defeated and continued to think God was on his side. Everyone begs him to stop and return home. No, the Battle of Nancy. The Italian mercenaries in your army switched sides. The Duke of Lorraine and the Swiss again defeated him. The Alsatian and Swiss infantry encircled Charles and his horsemen. In the River Meurthe, he fell from his horse and was struck on his head with a halberd which pierced his helmet and went into his skull. Half of the Burgundian army died during the battle or while retreating. The corpse of Charles the Bold the Rash was found 2 days after the battle, when it was found lying on the icebound river, with half of his head frozen. How many mistakes does it take to keep destroying yourself despite everyone telling you to stop? Story 22 With admitted bias from a life spent in the golf world, you'll submit. Tiger Woods, man was one or two most well-known athlete on earth, thought by the masses to be as squeaky as clean could be, then crashed and burned historically, literally overnight. Story 23 Aung San Suu Kyi. For years she was hailed as a human rights and democracy campaigner in Myanmar, and then when she got into power she oversaw the Rohingya genocide. Story 24 Bill Cosby. He went from America's dad to America's rapist. My family used to listen to his stand-up records long before any TV shows, and we loved him. I've never been more sickened. Story 25 Putin had a pretty good reputation, especially after that shirtless photo. Now most people outside of Russia see him for what he is: a murdering dictator and a vile human being. Story 26 Queen Elizabeth's uncle, Edward VIII, abdicated the throne and married an American divorced woman, Wallis Simpson. It went downhill from there, from king to nothing. Story 27 Kevin Spacey. We got stories in Venezuela in the 90s. Then the assault in the park happened and nothing came of it. Then a sea of additional stories started appearing online and people were calling the victims liars. It seemed like no one really cared, until Anthony Rapp. Then none of the victims saw justice. But Spacey's reputation was destroyed. Then Spacey couldn't pay his Baltimore mansion bills, so he became a squatter in it. Story 28 Rudy Giuliani. For sure, once America's mayor, would have had bridges, high schools and parks named after him. Now he shuffles around Manhattan and looks like the Penguin, and Donald doesn't give a rat's. Story 29 On June 15, 1992, Dan Quayle corrected 12-year-old student William Figueroa's correct spelling of potato to potato at the Muaz Rivera Elementary School Spelling Bee in Trenton, New Jersey. Story 30 Sir Thomas Cromwell. One day you're Henry VIII's right-hand man and fixer, then you arrange one marriage to a German princess and you're headless. This was after he made England rich by closing monasteries. Let's not forget subtly manipulating Henry into making a whole country change their religion to where the king is the head and not the pope. Tudor England was wild. Story 31 Emperor Vitellius of Rome has to be up there. Born to minor nobility, became consul, then governor, then a military commander. His troops declared that he was the emperor now and marched on Rome to give him that title. He ruled for all of about 7 months before another general did the same thing, and Vitellius was dragged through the streets, beaten to death, and may have had his severed head paraded around Rome. Story 32 In Boleyn, going from the Queen of England, a beloved wife like your husband literally decided to break up alliance with one of the most powerful kingdoms and the church itself just for you, from a family that is getting so much power. To be accused and condemned in a false trail of adultery with your own brother, both executed and your family is disgrace. Story 33, I think it's Bill Cosby. He went from being America's dad and a role model for black parents to jail in a very short time. Historically, Benedict Arnold's name is still synonymous with being a traitor. Story 34, Bill Cosby. He went from literal icon crushing it to all races, to just awful. There wasn't a kid I grew up with that couldn't quote the Jell-O pudding pop commercials, and then he was just never heard from again. Story 35, Rudy has been a spectacular fall from grace. He crushed the mafia, then became the nation's mayor. Then he was standing in front of 4-season lawn care with dye dripping down his face, hammered, and was suddenly losing libel cases and a complete disaster. Story 36, forgot his name, but he was the CEO of one of Europe's largest jewelry stores. They smashed sales to the point that nobody else even came close. Would have easily been one of the biggest companies in Europe, had he not blabbed at a conference that all his jewelry was junk and were intentionally selling cheap trinkets at super high markups. When his words were printed on newspapers and echoed across the land, the stock tanked and the company went bankrupt overnight. Story 37, the Neanderthals. Totally nailed navigating the European terrain amongst different and shifting climates. Along come sapiens, and despite some love and mixing, as seen in most Europeans' DNA, they totally just failed. ID suggests the Denisovians as a second. While we have far less of an archaeological record of them, their DNA lives on in more Popal as an echo of their greatness at some point in history throughout Asia, though more dispersed. Actually, maybe ID put, based on that, the Denisovians' #1 fall, and then Neanderthals, Philippe Pétain. He was the greatest hero of WW1 in France. Like, you can't imagine how popular he was. In 1940 the situation is desperate. France is losing against Germany, so it is decided to put Pétain at the head of the government. Immediately he surrenders to Germany, then gave himself the full power, putting the end to the Third Republic. He became a close collaborator to Hitler, especially when it comes to deporting Jews, literally doing more than Hitler asked of him. Without him, a lot more of French Jews would have probably survived. At the end of the war he's arrested and condemned to death, but it would be changed to a life sentence. He died a few years later. He's remembered as the greatest traitor in French history, and he's probably the French person we hate the most. Story 38, this is a post-mortem fall by a few centuries, but Christopher Columbus. As a kid, I was taught that he was the one who discovered America in 1492 and was the first to suggest that the earth was round. He was one of the lionized historical figures. Not only were neither of those claims true, but over the past decade, it seems society is increasingly considering what a massive piece of he was. Story 39, Hitler went from Time Man of the Year in 1938 to a byword for villainy. For the de facto most evil man in history, he's the poster boy for bad person and would probably win just about any vote for worst human. Not necessarily because he's worse than Khan or Stalin, but because that's the spot he occupies in the zeitgeist. With the benefit of hindsight, it doesn't feel like a fall from grace. It's hard to put yourself in a place where Hitler was well respected. But it wasn't until the crimes of Nazi Germany became widely known that Hitler truly lost his not inconsiderable global esteem. None of this is intended to sound as though I think his reputation at present is undeserved. For the record, just for the record, he was a piece of. Story 40, while not the most dramatic, Ian Watkins went from being one of my favorite musicians to someone I get physically sick thinking about what he did. I'd call him one of the sickest humans who ever lived, but he's a monster and not a human, which sucks cause Last Train Home is such a banger. Story 41, Who Edwards, news anchor for over 20 years in all of history. It's not some modern celebrity. It's some emperor who was beloved by everyone and then horribly tortured to death once they were turned on. This kind of thing happened multiple times. Or say, Julius Caesar goes from ruling the Roman Republic to being murdered by the Senate in very short order. Story 42, Caligula. He was a beloved emperor in his early reign and then he fell deathly ill. The people of Rome prayed he would recover. They got their wish. Many of them didn't live long enough to regret it. Story 43, Benedict Arnold. He was George Washington's right-hand guy, hugely celebrated all over as a war hero. He could have gone down in history as a founding father. If the Brits had won the war, had probably been knighted. Instead he's the definition of a traitor. His name is literally the one people used to call others a turncoat. He's reviled by everyone. Story 44, Meghan Markle's was a duchess standing next to the Queen on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. Now, she's a failed influencer hated by millions. She dragged Prince Harry down with her. He used to be a respected British prince. Now he's a nobody. It only took a few years. Story 45, J.K. Rowling went from rags to riches and literally changed the modern world of literature and reading. Potter was everything and everywhere. Now, she continues her attempt at becoming one of the most universally hated women in the world, doubling down on her beliefs that are at a polar opposition to the themes she taught in her fiction. The drama is still ongoing because she won't freaking stop. Story 46, Rudy Giuliani's descent was bewildering. He went from America's mayor to a betrayed and duped and heavily fined Trump sycophant like he was in freefall. Story 47, Justin Trudeau. He went from beloved to the reason why many don't like the Liberal Party. It's kinda wild he managed to tank his reputation to the extent he did in only 9 years. Story 48, as a gigantic music nerd, when it comes to hip-hop rap, I honestly can't decide whose fall-off is more dramatic, Drake or Kanye. Kanye's always been wild, but nothing from his early days could have prepared us for the levels of chaos and insanity that he and Drake, sure, I'm confident his commercial success will remain intact, But after the Kendrick beef, his rep took a big hit. In spite of always having critics naysayers, he was near untouchable. Now he's basically the poster boy for being a culture vulture poser and can't be mentioned without his sketchy behavior with barely legal girls coming up. It's been kinda sad to watch Michael Jackson. Story 49. Kanye didn't kill or rape anyone, but he had a pretty epic, quick and downright weird downfall. He lost his status as a cultural icon and as a billionaire in less than a month. Kanye West: no American icon has ever self-destructed so spectacularly. He once said that he lost $2 billion in a day. From Google AI, Adidas is projected to lose approximately $1.3 billion in sales and $534 million in operating profit due to the severing of its partnership with Kanye West. Story 50. Recently, I'd say Wayne Gretzky went from being called the Great One to hanging out with Trump Co., being called a traitor to Canada, people boycotting his wine, and he's now being called the Great Once amongst other. Dude went from being a hero to a traitor in the span of like a week or two. Story 51. Jimmy Savile would be a good contender in the UK, friends with the royals and friends with politicians, including Margaret Thatcher when she was PM. He was also the presenter on 2 incredibly popular shows. Sadly, his fall didn't come till after his death. There were always rumors about him though. Johnny Rotten famously called him out on TV in the 70s. Richard Herring and Stuart Lee referenced the rumors on 2 in the 1990s. Apparently Thatcher kept trying to get him knighted, but the Queen was advised against it for a long time. He did all this charity work and people were always told that he was a national treasure, but the majority of people always felt there was something off with him. People joked about him, but no one could have predicted just how bad things were. Pablo Escobar has to be worth a mention. The Colombian public adored him till it all started going downhill after the plane bombing with civilians on board. Story 52. Nicolae Ceausescu, dictator of Romania, to gunned down by firing squad. Video on YouTube of him giving a speech and suddenly realizing the crowd has turned against him. Story 53. The Spanish were once the dominant force in the world, with easily the strongest navy at the time. They were on their way to conquer England when a massive storm took out nearly their entire armada, including all of the Marines on board the ships. England took control over the seas, soon thereafter, and became the dominant world power. Story 54. America burned every bridge with some of its staunchest allies, knocked enormous holes in the bottom of the world's biggest economy through misguided foreign economic policy and clear stock market manipulation to enrich its supporters, tore down its own government and installed ungoverned agencies in key oversight positions. Sends people with no criminal record to high-security prisons in a foreign country, with no judicial branch oversight, is actively trying to overturn every check and balance mechanism to its power, all in the span of less than 100 days. Story 55. Currently, Korea's former president, Yoon Suk-yeol, I slept through a dictatorship power grab. He called martial law at 10 p.m. at night sometime on December 2024. I woke up in the morning to a democracy again. He refused to leave office after everyone wanted his head. Millions of Koreans came out to protest every weekend. In all this protest, not a single person died or got hurt. Now he's been fully removed and facing jail time. The story goes, he was trying to remove his opposition and there was a rumored plot to assassinate his rivals. One of his rivals he was targeting is a National Assembly member who survived a knife attack to the neck in the past and survived for his opposition stance. Basically, Yoon wanted to disguise the whole operation as North Korean agents infiltrating the South Korean government. In the chaos, he was going to send in special forces into the National Assembly to detain his opposition and accuse them of being Korean infiltrators and treasonous. There are rumors as well there were orders for the military to kill his opposition under a false flag operation. Yoon also sent drones into North Korea at the same time. This was all happening to try to spring an attack response to make his cover story more legit, but the North did nothing and were confused why these drones were flying over Pyongyang. The soldiers in the Korean military did not want to hurt civilians and National Assembly members either. No one wanted to do it. They had orders from the top, so they had to show up. But we can see in captured videos they were just pretending to carry orders. Yoon lost control of the situation and National Assembly members broke into the building to end the coup attempt. Story 56. Okay, he's still a wealthy man in his own right, but Gerald Ratner was the CEO of the Ratner Group, which were jewelers and had stores all over the country. At a business dinner he made a crack about 2 of the items he sold and it got a laugh, so he repeated it at another dinner and the press got a hold of it and it basically bankrupted the company. Stores were closed and the company lost 500 M. Story 57. Anne Boleyn. She went from Queen of England to an executed traitor in just under 3 years. Catherine Howard, her cousin, managed to do the same in just over a year, but she was a pawn in other people's hands, whereas Anne campaigned and strategized to win her thrive. Story 58. Philippe Taine has got to be up there. He was thought of as a hero after having commanded the French army during World War I, and then a complete rat after becoming the head of state in Vichy France. Story 59. Conor McGregor's downward spiral has been pretty drastic. A contrasting example may be Mike Tyson. Destroyed his reputation and then worked hard, matured, rebuilt, and now has a lot of wisdom to share. Story 60. Neil Gaiman. His devoted fanbase is left to confront the stark reality that he is the antithesis of the man he claimed to be. He touted himself as a feminist, yet the indescribable depravity of the allegations has left an indelible mark, while his ties to Scientology have cast a shadow over his achievements. raising questions about the legitimacy of his entire legacy. His transformation into a despicable figure has not only destroyed his reputation but also exposed the complicity of his wife, a renowned musician and writer. Their divorce is ongoing. She was privy to Neil's heinous crimes against vulnerable women, and instead of speaking out, she penned songs about the oppression of women. The true nature of their crimes is so disturbing that it cannot be described without a trigger warning. Story 61. Lance Armstrong. Dude was a top cyclist, had cancer, beat it and came back to win 7 straight Tours de France. Was a freaking hero to many, only to finally admit to doping.